Hi, Amir. Welcome to Jeff's Marketing Academy, also known as Web3 Digital Marketing Entrepreneur Podcast. And it's so great to have you here. So please tell a bit about yourself and how you started in the Metaverse space and everything so far.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I'm the CEO of Virtualeap. My background before Virtualeap and before the VR sector was starting at the market research side of things. I worked with companies like Electronic Arts and in understanding users and all of these techniques that have to do with big numbers of sample sizes and ultimately being able to do predictions based on those statistics and sample sizes. Quantitative research versus qualitative, where qualitative is all about digging into the individual's subconscious and all these things.
Yeah.
And I went from market research quite seamlessly to games publishing. For about 8 years, I was in that sector until I particularly wanted to get into the VR sector, but didn't have any experience. So my decision was to become a tech writer for about 4 years for blogs like TechCrunch and VentureBeat. I only wrote about pretty much virtual reality. So when that time, I don't know, hit like 80 plus articles, I kind of knew that VR, and specifically VR for education and VR for healthcare, was where I wanted to go into. And that's the essence of Virtually.
Awesome. And so you actually worked in EA. That's like Electronic Arts, the gaming company, and all that, right?
I didn't work for them. I was
Ah,
their partner.
okay.
I ran what they called a online panel. I was their online
Ah,
panel partner. So what we did is we converted a very large database of EA customers and converted them into basically research panelists online who would
okay.
regularly respond to research studies and so on. So EA would have a market research team, but they would outsource every kind of operational act of actual research, which in our case, I was the one that was their point man.
It must have really helped you, right? Like, gaining that experience from a gamified, that places and putting that in a VR healthcare where.
I think you're right. It gave me exposure that ultimately little pieces of this and little pieces of that, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
I look at careers in general
Hmm.
or self knowledge in any way you want to cut it. All these types of ways of finding your place in the world.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's often an experience of finding little pieces and then holding on to the ones that are meaningful, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, you find a way to put all of them together.
Yeah. Understood. So, just I have one interesting thing to ask you is that since you're in Spain and we have seen a lot of these VR, AR, XR, all these technologies have been talked mainly in the context of it's been done in the US or, very major regions. Okay. Now, there is a lot of small, not small, but countries that are not usually viewed as such has been talked about recently these days. So, how's the market going in your place and, in the surroundings of yourself as well?
Yeah, well, on the research side, which I'm really heavily centric on, when you look at the neuroscience studies of VR being used for pain management or behavioral modification techniques, or in the cases of where Virtualeap is centered in cognition and cognitive training, cognitive therapeutics, diagnostics, the studies come worldwide. Sometimes you don't know about the studies in some domains, some regions, because of the language barrier, sadly enough. But typically, that's not the usual thing. The best studies are always more or less in English. Luckily, it's in one language that more or less you can see the biggest publications, that regardless of where those studies were done. So we know in China, Japan, India, Middle East, everywhere pretty much.
Yeah.
And yet you are correct. The bulk of things, research-wise and certainly commercial-wise, happens in the U.S. It's becoming less restrictive because of the price point. Compared to 3-4 years ago, the price point of a VR headset's maybe half price almost.
Yeah.
So if that trend keeps on going, then you won't have to restrict other economies from having access to it, because it does come down to the size of people's wallets for discretionary income, and do the school systems in countries across Asia, Europe, do they still have the same kind of capacity to get the high tech gear. I think COVID certainly served in one way as an equalizer in making people realize the value of these technologies if we are to encounter these types of challenges again in the future. And I think I'm always knocking on wood that a lot of these school systems, healthcare systems worldwide, not just in the US, are increasingly looking into implementing them.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking the question is because I have this Google News alert, and I have keywords like virtual reality and augmented reality and all that in the Google alerts, and I've never seen researches or things like that from any of the European countries or anywhere at all. Because mostly it focused on, if I put VR, the main concept I get is from the Oculus. But when I digged a little bit deep, there's like tons of VR headsets out there, which is cheaper, and which has way more how to say technologies and everything. So let's say for the audience who is very familiar with just the Oculus, do you have any
Hmm.
other headset that you would suggest, or you would say for enterprises to try them out, in your opinion?
So, in fact, Oculus, the brand name, has been phased out. Now it's called the Meta
Yeah.
Quest. A lot of us who have been in the industry long enough, we do miss that nostalgic Oculus brand, but it's no longer called that. The Meta Quest 2, Meta Quest 3 coming up with a lot of cool features. You know, if it wasn't for Meta, this industry, as far as I'm concerned, would not exist as in its current maturity, especially in the B2B front. Consumer side is still not something I would necessarily call mainstream in some ways, because we don't have the data to really understand retention and so on. There's only two particular competitors, I would say, you know, in a certain light. There's HTC, which is a Taiwan headquartered company, been around in VR for quite some time. An interesting company that has a completely different strategy in terms of product releases and approaches. More flexible in some ways, I would say. They've been more curious and experimenting with B2B applications and
Hmm.
partnerships on serious use cases a little bit earlier than I think Meta in some ways, which has on their part really been trying to punch through this consumer side, which I think is also a worthy focus. You have to go, what is your focus? What is your
Yeah.
strategy? How do you do it? It's a really complex thing when it's a frontier technology. The third competitor is Pico,
Hmm.
Chinese headquartered, but increasingly emergent in Europe and the US,
Hmm.
very preferred across the B2B side of things,
Yeah.
particularly because of Meta's somewhat controversial past with data collection. Pico doesn't have that history, and so it is somewhat preferred when it comes to hospitals and so on.
Got it. And I think the data and all, there's definitely a lot of issues already happening. But with the VR headset, I think the data collection will be like way more advanced. Just imagine, like, they will track your eye movement and say, okay, this guy is seeing this, so place their ads over there. So whoever
Right.
bids more ads, in that particular section of the headset, they'll get more return or something. So yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And before moving on to the healthcare section, or of the conversation, um, since, as you mentioned, this VR industry wouldn't have matured this much if it's not for Meta. And I mean, to be honest, I think it's true to some extent, because I've heard of these technologies, but not like in a very vast manner. So what would you say to those people who want to enter into this space in the enterprises? Like, how much it would cost them to implement these technologies, and how they can do it? Any take on that?
If you're if you're a company that wants to be interested in this, if you're a user, if you're an individual, it's different, of course. But a
Hmm.
lot of times, people in companies, or let's say it's an older adult aging clinic or senior living community, a lot of
Hmm.
those people want to use these technologies for novelty,
Yeah.
reduce the deterioration towards Alzheimer's disease,
Hmm.
longevity. VR is really powerful for these applications. Of course, K-12, but people always think that they need more headsets than they actually do. Do you need 15 headsets to budget for? Oh my God, it's so expensive. No, maybe you only need 3 or 2. So I think it's people go too big too
Hmm.
soon, whereas you just experiment with a device. You can even rent these devices experimentally for periods of time. So it's really about, is there a will to do it? If there's a will to do it, there's always a way to do it. I think depending on the use case, which we aren't defining here, but you know, there's things in K-12 that VR can do for igniting passion. There's a lot of people who are visual learners, spatialized learners, kinesthetic learners. VR is a multisensory, your proprioception is feeling it intuitively. It's designed for the human system because it's an imitation of real reality versus the types of interfaces with a 2D screen-based device, which is really alien technology. If you have any older adult, someone even in their 80s, go into a virtual reality environment, they're going to be able to understand how to pick up a glass of water in VR because it's the imitation of it. So, ecologically valid environments have huge advantages when it comes to adherence levels, when it comes to engagement across a period of time that usually doubles when people start getting bored of a screen-based device. So they need to understand the value, and if they have the value, then I don't think cost is really an issue, to be honest.
And I think they have to understand the reason they're entering also, right? I think a lot of people actually enter just for the sake of maybe getting onto news, or some
Right.
brands might do that.
Right. Well, there is certainly a lot of that across the board. I've been in the industry only about 5 years, 6 years now, and it feels like doggy years with VR. It doesn't feel like just 6 years. It feels longer. I feel old, in fact, from it. And because it's a frontier tech, and you're always pushing the envelope to get noticed, to break through, to hold on and convert a 1-year deal into multi-year, because you don't know how those perceptions are changing or fading. A lot of people do it for the novelty effect. You're certainly correct. I think the biggest companies do that even more than the smaller ones. They have R&D innovation arms that just want to show that they're doing R&D and innovation. And then after a couple of years, they just discontinue something that they built a community around, and then they actually abandon that community in the most psychopathic way, to be honest. So that's very, very top of mind to me even right now.
Exactly. And one of the examples I could think of straight away is, I don't know, this is a very big company. I don't want to say the name because I don't want to be wrong at the same time, but they have
Me
been
neither. Me
yeah.
neither. Yeah.
So they're saying they will do it on and off. They say they will do, they won't. But I think like how this, when this AI technology came in, there's a lot of companies who wanted to push the same trend and lost billions of dollars. I think they are trying to do the same, but in a very careful manner, not exactly giving out the points, but okay, we will do, we won't do, still no sale done, so no damage done. Yeah, I think that's a pretty conspirative thing to look after.
There's
Yeah.
some of them are really into it because they have certain groups within their ecosystem
Yeah.
that are champions of it, very hardcore. And I have a couple of those names in my head right now. Whereas there's other ones that once that project, kind of that PR stunt almost, is over, they just recycle those individuals who are like chameleons within the middle management of a
Yeah.
company, and they just go from XR innovation to Web3 innovation, and every shiny next thing that comes out, oh, the word metaverse is here. I'm going to be a metaverse,
Yeah.
mover and shaker. And then, so there's two different types of people, two different types of creatures. The ones who are lifelong champions of something because in their core, they become believers of the value of that technology to, in the case of VR, transcend literally space and time, to democratize access to the bleeding edge of so many things that were never possible before because of the embodiment of VR. In my case, of Virtualeap, the embodiment means we can actually engage the full biochemistry range of a human being, into an experience. You can't do that with anything else. So treating phobias is treating PTSD for veterans, to chemo brain and long COVID and ADHD, all these things. So it's profound applications. So if those individuals, for example, like founders, what separates a founder? A good founder usually has a story that why they're in it for a personal reason, not just because they're just, want to be a founder because it's sexy or something. I don't know. But there are those people, they're just doing it because there is nothing else better to do versus the mission driven ones. And that's the same truth for people in those big organizations, and what makes those organizations either, just dabblers or mission driven.
Yeah. And what was your why? Just curious to ask.
Well, my personal phobias got me into VR. Fear of heights. I started learning. I was approaching VR to help with my vertigo,
Hmm.
and then I started writing for VentureBeat and TechCrunch on it. So my neural networks started wrapping themselves around VR on a daily basis. Like how many notebooks of research I wrote by hand and then converted into these articles of 750 words per pop, and talking to so many experts across the different domains. So it's a mix of those two things: personal interest getting me into helping myself, and then side by side actually becoming an expert on how it can help not just me, but a vast range of people and conditions and circumstances.
Wow, that's pretty cool actually. Because for me, I started in a very cliche way. I had my heart broken when I was in college, and I was like, I have to do something in life, to make sure that not getting revenge mentality, but to show off to people. Then that's when I started, watch the Gary Vaynerchuk's advertisement on Anchor, and then I was like,
Mm.
okay, let's start a podcast. I just started a podcast 4 years ago. This is kind of my sixth show, but I had like four other shows, which is like two of them are not consistent right now. But I think, like you mentioned, the personal reasons have really great impact, and with your personal reason that you mentioned as well. But with the VR, what are other things that can be solved as well? One thing you mentioned is the phobias and PTSD and all the things. Do you have any other things that can also be solved using the virtual reality?
You mean like well, the game. There's so many games out there, and AAA quality games for
Hmm.
shooting zombies, escapism, distraction oriented activities to spend
Hmm.
20 or plus minutes on some game. I've never been into that. I've never even thought VR is a good solution for that. I think
Hmm.
VR is that kind of solution that helps us get back into the real world.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so education and healthcare oriented. The games are really making good money as well. So at least that's a focus that will keep the big players like PlayStation, for example, the latest
Yeah.
PlayStation with their latest VR attachments and so on. These are doing quite well, and they're going to continue to do well because of the AAA
Hmm.
game studios. And so, in a way, we have to always be us smaller players focusing on very serious use cases. We have to be uh, aware of how the market works, and that
Yeah.
gaming is, I don't like to bring it up, but pornography, of course, and gaming are the
Yeah.
two drivers that really push a lot of new technologies into
Hmm.
proper adoption. Right? I think if pornography wasn't the mover and shaker that it was, we wouldn't have the whole fintech movement as advanced as it is right now. And of
Yeah.
course, gaming and gambling, those three
Yeah.
things, right, which are more or less somewhat vices, and not, let's not say AAA gaming is a vice, but certainly gambling and the other are. So they are using the top passions of a certain categories, and that brought them in. And certainly in VR, I have no idea. I make a point not to look into what's happening in the pornography VR scene. And venture capital really stays away from that area too, which is helpful. So
Hmm.
we don't have to get too many updates in my latest what's going on and who got funded. We don't get any of that. Of course, there is stuff happening. It's just not visible in the news.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that plays a role too.
Yeah, I just want to mention one small thing. Being a marketer, I've done some keyword research regarding the virtual reality. And when I did that, I went to SEMrush, and what I found is the top performing keyword is VR for pornography. Like, or this other thing, pole dancing, something like strip club. Yeah, strip club
Really?
kind of thing. Yeah,
Wow.
those things are like top performing keywords, and like tons of competitors are out there. So I've always wondered, like, but I don't know how these things got really popular, and it was never in the light. I mean,
Mm.
unless otherwise you search for it, you will never get the details. Okay, this much $1 billion industry is making in VR. No one would have ever known. Have you ever got any requests like that? Like some people who are asking you to create things like that. Have you ever got any request?
One of my friends that I worked with in the game publishing industry, I know he was, sought out to invest in a VR porn venture. That's my limit, actually. That's all I know. And again, it's because my consciousness avoids the dark valleys. I think when it comes to the latest technologies and what they're going to be unlocking,
Yeah.
the chat GPTs with AI, deep fakes, with VR. I mean, we're going to go into some areas where there will be some
Mm.
technologies that are going to have a very deleterious effect on, TikTok's already destroying short-term memory processing skills in our latest generation. Our technology at Virtualeap is all oriented towards rebuilding the attention levels,
Mm.
the strengthening memory muscles and all these types of cognitive domains. I think the majority of these technologies are going to have a horrible consequence that we need to pay attention on developing the remedies.
Yeah.
The double-edged sword is always there, but it's the sword itself is getting bigger and sharper as technologies get sleeker and
Mm.
more magical and mysterious in their effects.
Exactly. And I also saw this video where, someone mentioning that he was actually memory champion, in your website that, 5 times and stuff. And it was pretty
Yes.
interesting and how he used the VR about having different panels, for enterprises use cases. So would you like to tell a little bit more about, Virtual Leap and how you guys are implementing and doing those stuff as well?
Yes, we've been working since 2018, and particularly in stealth mode for about 4 years before we could even commercialize, because you can't cut corners when you're making science-backed or
Mm.
science-driven technologies of this sort. We created an application and technologies to be agnostic across a variety of cognitive domains. So therapeutic areas like Alzheimer's disease, but also ADHD, also being used in the pharma sector to help speed up clinical trials, really a variety of different things. And that enterprise tool is really designed for clinicians or researchers or commercialized, partners, publishers, licensors.
Yeah.
The main pilots that we're currently running right now include one with Roche, the pharma, specific to serving as a remote cognitive monitoring tool for those living with dementia, for example, at
Mm.
home, being taken care of by their families or caretakers. MIT did a pilot last summer where they were focusing on using an algorithm that we have in our
Mm.
system that takes, it kind of goes into your last point about biosensors, but some of the headsets have pupil dilation tracking and heart rate variability. And we have
Mhm.
an algorithm that takes those biosensors and calculates with an AI learning algorithm whether the individual is focused or not in real time. So
Hmm.
MIT did a study using our tool and the algorithm to see what was a self-perception of effort levels versus actual cognitive load. That's another area. And last Friday we published our first study in the Frontiers of Virtual Reality journal
Hmm.
on the therapeutic potential effects on ADHD, students with ADHD. So, it's really about being a technology partner, enabling academics and clinics and commercial partners to use it in whichever direction, from K-12 to company human performance programs and training, and of course, therapeutic areas like, can we slow down cognitive deterioration past a
Hmm.
certain older age and battle this scary illness called Alzheimer's disease.
Got it. And I think you also covered the areas mainly, for in the healthcare sector that's been, used. And one point I want to, point is that for the old age people, because I think there's a lot of things happening. For example, there was this virtual church, for people who couldn't actually go to churches, they were
Yes.
sponsored at home. It was happening like way before, I think it was May 2020 something, it was happening during that stage as well. So I think you are focusing mainly on 6 sectors. At least that's what I got from the site so far. Sorry for stalking. So from the 6 sectors, which one do you think is performing so well, currently?
It's a big question right now because we are in a fork in the road where I really want to focus on K-12 with
Uh,
students, with learning, with self-knowledge. And then on the other hand, there's so much emphasis on these healthcare issues like, ADHD, and when you have COVID, people are having memory fog, and
Hmm.
it's so interesting. And when we get these big companies come in, and we're a small, Millennium Falcon, it's just Chewie and Han Solo on board with a skeleton crew. When a big naval ship comes over and tells us to go in this direction and has resources, we do get kind of gravitated towards the wake that they bring, and that's not a good thing. It means sometimes we get this way and then that way, we wiggle around. I personally, this year, am very much trying to focus as much as possible on ADHD,
Hmm.
to be a therapy for it in that direction of doing clinical studies that advance that validation, become an FDA regulated solution that can be reimbursed by doctors, that can prescribe a video game
Yeah.
enhanced VR instead of prescribing a drug like, I don't know, Ritalin for ADHD and so on. I think that's my personal focus at the moment is youth and learning difficulties.
Awesome. Oh, I wish you all the luck, for this year's all the other things. And just before going to the final section, this is something I always ask my guest, after the box. Is it morning or evening there? What time is it?
It's 2 p.m., so neither.
Neither. Okay. So the question is, who was actually the first person that you made smile today?
Oh, it's my wife for sure. I'm such a joker. I couldn't have failed to make her smile today. I make it. It's my duty
Hmm.
to make her mornings as happy as possible. And to be honest, you're the second face I've actually seen today, so that has to be true.
Wow, great. So, just one final question I want to ask you is that since we talked a lot about VR and healthcare and the industries and everything, what do you think the future holds? Because a lot of investments are coming in, and even though the recession is going on, I've seen the Meta Quest has done a lot of thing on sales. So, what do you think the future holds for VR, especially in the healthcare industry?
Mark Zuckerberg is the captain of that ship, and to some extent, it's a very strange company compared to competitors. Google or Apple or all these other ones. They're much more. They're just much more standard corporations in many ways. Not to say that they're not all different in many other ways. Not to say black or white, but Meta is doubling and tripling down. They're not moving out of that sector, and their next device is going to have pass-through mixed
Mm,
reality, which means, and a lot of their focus right now is not necessarily VR. It's
mm,
VR applications that can also be AR with the same one device, and that's going to be, I think, the next Quest 3 device. So as usual, they're the ones who push that next, frontier
yeah.
into play, and then the rest of the companies that are less kamikaze
Mm,
oriented, like Zuckerberg is in this direction, like all in or nothing.
yeah.
Valhalla. We know real, like, this is the spirit that I like, and I think you're going to see a, a much more mature state of the industry when this
Mm,
next generation of devices with pass-through mixed reality embedded into them, and the value proposition of that device at the same price point, more or less,
yeah.
suddenly becomes much more interesting, because people might start using that headset outside for the first time. You don't want to use a VR headset in a coffee shop. When you take off the headset, your phone and your wallet are gone.
Yeah. That'd be pretty crazy. And also having that much, headset inside a particular place,
It's
that'd
not.
be really,
It's
really
not.
cool.
It's not. It's not. It's very socially awkward if
Yeah.
as an only VR device. But if you make it a pass-through device, if you make it a mixed reality device that has both VR and AR functionality, now we're talking. That's this
Exactly.
year. That's what we're going into now.
Awesome. Really looking forward to that. So, Amir, thank you so much, for hopping onto the show. So right now, table's turned. Is there anything else that you want to ask me?
What would you like to see in the next 2-3 years in VR? What excites you the most?
Well, to be honest, I'm kind of the same. I'm kind of the same boat that you were. Right now, I've actually started this marketing journey after seeing Zuckerberg's, a lot of things and talks and stuff. So I did my marketing and did my MBA and all that, and did I'm actually a digital marketer right now. I'm actually working in a company. And when he turned that to virtual reality and all that, I was really interested. Okay, this guy is going somewhere. Let's try to tag along with him. So I'm kind of learning the face of virtual reality, all that stuff, and trying to get into that space, maybe a career or all this stuff. So my main aim is that if those VR headsets could come down to a price in a probably 2 to 3 years where a normal person can actually use and get benefited out of it, then it would be great. Because smartphones, it took a lot of years for smartphones to come to a price point. So everyone is saying that a VR headset would be as important as a smartphone. So if it comes to a price point where, okay, a normal person can use for his ADHD or PTSD or whatever thing that he's facing, then that's something that I would really love to have. Yeah.
You're talking about what, $100 for the minimum product, less, or what would that
Yeah.
price point be? Because right now it's about $400, right? And some
Yeah.
smartphones are 6, 7, 800 more. But you're talking about smartphones that ultimately can be purchased for maybe $50. You should have a wide range of options that everyone can have access, right?
Yeah, mainly even smartphones, that's like with more features comes more prices. And I think the $400 maybe is because of an offer or something, or is it like a standard price point? I
They're
think it's,
subsidized. They're
yeah.
subsidized. They're
Yeah,
losing
something
money on
sort of.
every headset if it's 400.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the more features you want, the more price it comes. I think that would be fine, but with the minimum of maybe for 300 to 500, and majorly it depends on country basis also, right? Because for a US person and an Indian person, it's like way differ. Things is there, but yeah, I think once it has a normal, at least a middle class or a higher middle class person can offer that, then maybe it will work. Because insurance companies are also giving something for the virtual reality people, saying I don't know, I read this news somewhere. So yeah, when coming to that, that would be great. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to it, and I think it will be a period of 3 to 5 years
Yeah.
in which we'll start seeing the light at the end of the
Mm,
tunnel.
exactly. So yeah, so I mean, thanks again for hopping onto the story. If in case people want to find you and your services, where would that be?
I would add me on LinkedIn. I'm a really hardcore user of LinkedIn. So you can find me, Amir Bozorgzadeh, Virtualeap. You can also email me if you're potentially a kind of organization that would be interested in research projects. We love that. Clinics, academics, researchers at universities. We adore those types of opportunities. If you want to license our solution as a company as well, please just email me at Amir, at virtualeap.com.
Great. So guys, I'll definitely link everything in the description below, so you can go and check them out. And Amir, thanks again, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.